Guadalupe Center. And so we come together in that spirit of celebration with our artists today. And we have with us Dr. Paroma Martinez-Cruz. She is an associate professor at The Ohio State University in Latinx Cultural Studies. And as we were talking on the phone, I thought, Paroma, I know that name. And I shared with her that my Latin studies told me that Palombus means dove. And I thought, wow, how beautiful. And so we have with us the person that's bringing to us the spirit of beauty and peace in the midst of some of the conflict of a food fight. And those of us who know the conflict with the food truck festival this morning know we're in the midst of arriving, but the journey is a challenge, is it not? Mm-hmm. And as I was asking Paroma, what do you like about teaching? She said, it's the journey that the students take out of the classroom. One such student took that journey from Latino Studies to Washington, D.C. And I'm just going to look up what that quote was. That student learned that truth claims are contextual and cultural. Now you can see that in Washington, D.C. in the midst of diplomatic exchanges, but that person has come from this marvelous Dr. Paroma. So, I could go on about these wonderful accomplishments, but I'm going to ask you to take over and tell us about this food fight, which you have in this marvelous book, which is going to be available to us. And so, would you like to marvelous book?
Thank you. I would love to talk about my marvelous book. I thought you'd never ask. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Ellen, for this gracious invitation. Thank you, Columbus Cultural Arts Center, for the kindness and generosity of the invitation and the interest in my work. When you're a professor, you write a book, and you say, great. Now, no one will ever find out. It's like the safest place for radical work is in a book. So I'm glad to be able to be in conversation with you all, because often an academic book just lands in the hands of people who already know what they're looking for. So I think of it as, if you will, a miracle of karma. No, this great blessing that I get to just be in conversation, just out of nowhere, about some of the things that I'm learning about, some of the research that I've done, and why I think it's urgent, yeah? So I'm here and surrounded by these wonderful works of the Vasos de Arte exhibit that I understand will be up till September 14. And over there, we see Eliana Calle Sari's images of butterflies. And I wanted to point out how beautiful the mariposa, or the monarch butterfly in particular, is associated with migrants, because it migrates across the border and brings us so much beauty and inspiration, right? And it's such an uplifting thing. So I think when we look at that, it's a symbol for migration is beautiful. I wanted to just draw on some of that energy as I steer into some of the things that are not so beautiful, but that I think that we can do something about, yeah? My book is called, I'm gonna grab some more. So, my book is called Food Fight, Millennial Mestizale Meets the Culinary Marketplace, right? So, it's about Mexican food, farm labor, and image systems. So when I talked about what I would come and reflect on today from my book is specifically that we're surrounded by so many images when we go into a restaurant, when we see food advertising, right? So how do we orient ourselves according to those images? What kind of a public are these images creating, these images in advertising, right? So I'll talk a little bit about why I wrote this book and what's inside of it, and specifically the issue that I point out in my chapter about cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation, right? So, starting with why did I write this book? I think I came to Columbus, Ohio from Los Angeles, Chicago. My family's Mexican and Puerto Rican. I was in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. I actually was in Columbus, Georgia, right before I moved here. So that ties in a little bit with Ellen's introduction that I seem to not be able to shake the Columbus through line. You know, it sounds very vain. Columbus, Paloma, 2 cities in a row that were called Columbus. I guess next is Columbus, Missouri, if we're following that up. But I came from places where there were just a lot of Latino communities, and this was a lot smaller. We're close to 4% Latino population in Ohio, as opposed to over 50% in some of the places that I've lived. And I was hungry. I work full time. I'm not able to sit there and kind of grind my cornmeal and figure out how to make food by hand in traditional ways. And striking out, looking at, having culinary adventures in the Midwest outside of the Mexican neighborhood of Pilsen, where I lived in Chicago, where Mexican food was on tap. I found I was looking for places that felt relatable to eat. And I did find some good things or some promising things, but I also found a lot of, I would call them defamatory Mexican restaurants. Ones that were mocking or poking fun at Mexican people while making money, selling food that comes from that heritage that they're making fun of. So I refer to that a little bit later as cultural or culinary brownface or culinary racism. And I'm aware when I start talking about food justice and our eating choices, I can sound a little high and mighty, right? I sound a little judgerton from Judgeville. So I just want to offer a couple of passages that let you know a little bit where I'm coming from as a person. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but when we metaphorically weaponize our dietary practices, we can embody resistance with every swoop of the fork. My chapters follow the contours of my own embodied and geographic journey through the places where I dined, drank, observed, and interviewed participants at all levels of food provisioning and consumption. Some of it was delicious, but plenty of it was tragic. Even so, this book is not to be read as a lament. As I've heard cultural scholar Greg Tate say about the violence experienced far too often by people of color at the hands of repressive regimes, nightmare is the beginning of responsibility. In terms of my own background, which serves as an instrument of interpretation throughout this book, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, of mixed Mexican and Puerto Rican heritage. I lived in Mexico City and attended La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico during 1 year of my undergraduate career and returned regularly for both professional and personal opportunities. My assessments of food preparation are based on my culture and experiences and the fact that I now reside in Columbus, Ohio, a state whose Latino population was reported to be about 3.4% in 2014. After spending most of my life in Latino-dominant cities and neighborhoods, the quest for Mexican food that was somewhat relatable was one of the steepest challenges in adapting to Midwest living outside of Chicago. Also, I have been a vegetarian since high school, which naturally influences my exploration and interpretation of menu items. And I do a lot of home cooking for family and friends that stems from a California-based interpretation of Mexican foodways. It's probably also useful to understand that no one would mistake me for a millennial, right, from the title Millennial Mestizale meets the culinary marketplace. In the generational implications of this term, cell phones at the table make me frown. I've never texted LOL. I opened my first email account during my last month as a senior in college. At home, I was shaped by the latchkey kid phenomenon, which was the descriptor commonly used to describe Gen X, no, my generation, Generation X, youth who were home alone after school owing to the increase in divorce rates, higher maternal participation in labor outside of the home, and scant childcare options for working class families. My brother and I ate a lot of prepared and processed food in front of a TV before our mother arrived home from work. But on Fridays and weekends, we enjoyed it when she took us to eat at the many diverse types of restaurants that Los Angeles had to offer. Thai, Japanese, Italian, Mexican, Lebanese, Greek, Indian, and Chinese restaurants, along with kosher delis and pioneering vegan cafes. We're all on our small family steady rotation of dinner destinations. We ate lobster, large buttery tortillas in Ensenada, and escargot once at a French bistro on a road trip to Sacramento. We still laugh at my mother for thinking that was a good idea to stop there and take me and my brother. Like, wow, that was just a bad budget decision, Mom. Like, you took us to French food. Oh, Mom's try. With many tuna fish sandwiches and boxes of neon orange macaroni and cheese in between. My culinary mestizale was not always a glamorous thing. Once during the early grade school years, our Mexican grandmother packed us refried bean and chorizo sandwiches on toasted raisin bread. I spilled chocolate milk on it before I accidentally dropped it on the ground. And sometimes chorizo breakfast on Dad's weekend would result in gristle fights as we spit the chewy, inedible bits out and threw them at each other in an exchange of hysterical, bouncing ballistics. I bring an irreverent, mestiza set of gustatory preferences to this book that was shaped by a Generation X home life and a pragmatic view of the difference between what we aspire to eat and feed our loved ones and what actually happens at mealtime, okay? So I'm not trying to send people out to walk on water with their food choices. Bringing it back to how I organized this book, my first chapter is called Farm Worker to Table Mexican, Decolonizing Haute Cuisine. Maybe you've heard of the farm to table phenomenon, which is these days pretty much another way of saying gourmet, right? The high-end restaurants are expected to provide produce and provide food that is sourced locally, that is organic, that is fresh, that is seasonal. So farm to table signals all of those commitments in high-end dining. And I wanted to challenge this alternative food movement, this alternative food framework, to include the actual farm worker. Because saying it's organic is different than saying that the workers themselves enjoy protections of their human rights and their civil rights. So in this chapter, I urge us to think about the ways that the farm industry is overwhelmingly Latino or Latinx, mestizo, indigenous, Mexican, Central American, that we're getting close to an 80% population that is performing the agricultural work in this country, that our produce literally is brought to us on the backs of people of Latin American, Central American, and indigenous origin, overwhelmingly. So, What's at stake? I wanted to, in my chapter, and I'm going to read a little bit from my notes. So, the farm worker hired farm managers, supervisors, crop workers, nursery workers, livestock workers, farm workers writ large, right? They continue to be one of the most economically vulnerable populations in the United States. With an hourly wage average for a non-supervisory job reported at about $12.47 in 2017. The USDA reports that 49.2% of farm workers and supervisors are US citizens, with Hispanics constituting 63.8% of this workforce, making up 50% of the entire US population of wage and salary workers in 2016. We can see that the agricultural sector depends significantly on the work performed by peoples of Latin American origin. And that's fine for people whose wage labor is actually reported. But in 1993, tomato crop workers in Florida organized to form the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the CIW, to whom my book is dedicated, in order to demand social responsibility among growers and corporations, to put a stop to human trafficking, and insist on protections against gender-based violence in the field. In 2007, they were presented with the Anti-Slavery Award by Anti-Slavery International for their work uncovering and bringing to justice 6 separate modern slavery operations, under which 400 farm workers were held in captivity in Florida and South Carolina and forced to pick vegetables and citrus for 10 to 12-hour days under armed surveillance. Their pay was an approximate $20 a week. Attempts at escape were met with violent repression. So when we talk about the agricultural sector and its reported workers and its reported wages, we also have these under-the-table employment practices, and the CIW has been instrumental in putting an end to modern-day slavery. One of the things in this chapter that I specify is that our own support of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and of the food justice program that they helped to author goes a long way in our food fight. That's where our food fight is. Every time we pick up a fork, every time we do our grocery shopping, we can find out, does this grocery store sign on to the Fair Food Program? Kroger does not. Walmart does. Taco Bell has signed on to the Fair Food Program. Wendy's has not. And so along with some of my cohort, I have tried to get The Ohio State University to pay attention to the abuses, the human rights violations that go unchecked without these arbiters. The Fair Food Program is the best arbiter in terms of human rights and civil rights being preserved in the fields by very vulnerable populations of workers. So one of the things that I do, and I'm going to share, this is a little bit of a secret. It's a kind of dramatic secret, okay? I am not just a professor, but I'm a masked wrestler. I'm a masked wrestler. So the Fair Food Program, right? I already told you the safest place for scholarship is in a book. Then you can be sure that nobody's going to read it, especially people who have thoughts that are different from your own, right? Or beliefs, or come up with conclusions that are very different from your own. So one of the things that we do after we publish this is we came up with along with some of my collaborators. It's called the Taco Reparations Brigade. And I wear a wrestling mask, and I actually do tumbling moves. I play the heel. In Spanish, it's the ruda, the rude girl. And I am Misty Taco Bell's. Misty Taco Bell's. And she attacks her opponent, who is the baby face, or if you know familiar, you know, a little bit familiar wrestling to the baby face, or in Spanish it's the técnica, the technical fighter, not the rude girl fighter. So I attacked the technical fighter. Her name is Orgánica, Orgánica, right? Misty Taco Bell's versus Orgánica. We stage matches in front of qualifiably racist restaurants. And we pass out manifestos. Get it? See what I did there? Manifesto, manifesto. And they do say, if you provide support for the CIW by shopping at places that have signed on to the Fair Food Program, you're on the good side. You're on Orgánica's side. You've done something that day, right? By going to Taco Bell instead of Wendy's. This is the only thing Misty Taco Bells can really be proud of. You know, like Taco Bell actually signed on to the Fair Food Program. She's got a lot of things to be ashamed of. She attacks Orgánica with old El Paso taco kits. Do you remember seeing those in the store? They're still out there, you can still buy them, like old El Paso taco kits. And then she does a Chihuahua attack, which is a very dramatic ankle bite. And we're working on our tumbling moves. I'm recruiting new wrestlers this season. If anybody is interested, it's all ages, all body styles can get in the ring and make something happen and make their demands heard and contribute to the idea, right, of the manifesto and what we in public demand our restaurants do. Our restaurants are creating publics, consuming publics. And we're saying, we happen to notice that's racist, right? And we use our sense of humor, and it's agit-prop theater, right? You know, we're doing like just kind of clearly skit-style theater that's clearly pointing out in the most just black and white ways, right and wrong. Misty versus Orgánica, you know, racism is wrong. Join the Fair Food Program, or be aware of places be aware of establishments that have signed on to the Fair Food Program. Kroger has not. Walmart has. Walmart has a bunch of terrible practices, but they've signed on to the Fair Food Program, right? So they have a website, and we can pay attention to that. We protest Wendy's, and we go to the headquarters, and we let them know that it's not okay. We, Columbus, Ohio, we're the headquarters of Wendy's. Corporate offices. Our neighbors work there. Our children in schools are recruited to work there. We have an incredible voice with respect to the corporations in our town, right? They're us. They reflect us. What can we do? What is at our disposal, right? I mean, obviously for me it happens to be scholarship and crazy, crazy street theater, right? So what I will talk about next is, do I have any questions or any clarifications? Please.
Early on, you said that Inga, because we're on early on, you said that some restaurants mock.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
That is, I could have planted that question because that's exactly where I was going next. So, some of the restaurants that we stage this protest in front of, I call it, and I deal with it in I think it's my second chapter. My second chapter is called, getting there, almost there. It's called On Cinco de Drinko and Jimmy Chongos. Culinary brownface in the Rust Belt Midwest. So, when places use mocking language, for example, on Cinco de Drinko, that's not Spanish, and it's making fun of the Spanish language. It should be Cinco de Mayo, but they're using wordplay to call it on Cinco de Drinko, and these are their drink specials. Around the 5th of May, Cinco de Mayo, you're going to see a lot of advertising that uses mock Spanish. And I refer to that in my chapter as culinary brownface. Because we are aware that blackface as a performance wrong. We are aware that blackface as a cultural performance is racist, but there seem to be blind spots when it comes to Mexican restaurants and performances of Mexicanness in our foodways. There seem to be really serious cultural blind spots. I went into a place, one of the places that comes into my book here, is called Local Cantina, and they use a mustache as their logo. No, it's this artwork, right? Our systems of signs and symbols that create our shared public spaces. And this is a big restaurant chain here in Columbus. And their Cinco de Mayo advertising event, their special event, they invited you to ride the mustache, right? Ride the mustache. They have signs hung from their ceiling that say inexplicable things, such as bailar en el bigote, which means dance in the mustache. And then the sign next to it says, bigote sucio, dirty mustache. So I don't understand. Are we to imagine that they're selling mustache grooming products? Because that doesn't really track for a place that is selling tacos and taco salads and inviting you to drink specials. So somebody of Mexican descent understands they are being mocked when they step into this place. The fake mustache, the fake sombrero, the Mexican-ness is the butt of the joke, right? Haha, Mexican, right? You see that around Halloween where people dress in Mexican outfit, quote unquote, like they put on the sombrero and the fake mustache and the big poncho with the serape. And be like, haha, I'm a Mexican. Hilarious, right? We don't think it's that hilarious, and we want to let restaurants like this understand that it's defamatory, it's racist. There's a place near my campus that sells a brunch item called a dirty Sanchez. Now, that is a really, that's a very off-color sexual act, right? They sell a dirty Sanchez. I'm sorry, some of you may look it up later, and I apologize in advance for what you're gonna find. But it's called a dirty Sanchez, and it's hard to imagine. I call it culinary brownface because sometimes it seems like as a society we're coming to terms with the fact that blackface is wrong. I'm like, when are you going to also connect the dots and understand that calling a restaurant, for example, banditos, right? Banditry. Also the mustache refers to early cinema and banditry, or the Speedy Gonzalez taco plate, the Speedy Gonzalez combo. But the Chi-Chi's restaurant chain, which is where the Midwest has inherited the scaffolding for sit-down Mexican dinner establishments and places to go and celebrate. Chi-Chi in Mexican Spanish means booby. So in California, when I tell them that's the major Mexican restaurant chain, they're like, is it a strip club? What happens there? And I'm like, yeah, bring your singles. No, I don't say that. But the idea is they may not have really done any research and development to understand that for that culture, that means something really different than how you're sending it out there. And you didn't bother to think that what they know is important to your marketing system, to your image system, to your chance at making money and facing Anglo-Publics. You missed a step, right? You missed a step. They also tried to trademark the word salsification, and that didn't work out for them. Now you have a bunch of like empty shells of Chi-Chi's restaurants, where a lot of heritage people have come in and made businesses, Mexican restaurants, right? But Chi-Chi's is really a cultural inheritance of the Midwest, of culinary brownface, of saying this, you know, they would put the sombrero on and sing the happy birthday song, and they would end the song with, Olé! You know, like we do in the old country. Olé is Spanish from Spain, from Europe, right? It doesn't actually, it's not an actual Mexican expression, and that's not an actual Mexican happy birthday song. But noticing that none of that actually mattered to these restaurants, to these establishments, right? Yeah, and it's also hard to understand, I think, the dirty Sanchez as a brunch item. I think if it were called, for example, a dirty Sambo, someone would protest. What if it's a bagel called a dirty Herschel? I think someone would be upset. But because it's a dirty Sanchez, there are a lot of deliberate blind spots about the worth of migrants, the worth of Mexican peoples, the worth of people of indigenous extraction, the worth of people of Latin American heritage. There's a lot of very deliberate blind spots. And my book points out that our foodways are reinforcing those blind spots if we're not paying attention.
I was just thinking, you are educating us. And we made reference earlier to Latin, that you are leading us out of our darkness, because there are so many things you're saying which are not part of our consciousness. And, you know, quid jupitur, that which is received according to the mode of the recipient. We're the receivers, and we are not educated sufficiently about what you're saying. And I was thinking of Dave Thomas, founder of Wendy's. Such a great man. And I can remember a conversation with him about adoption, how he felt loved as an adopted child. And I'm thinking how he would sit down with you, Paloma, and say, help me understand about that tomato conflict. What, that was a couple of years ago? Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Can you sense that from what you heard about Dave Thomas? That I don't think he would allow this to continue if he heard what you're saying and you're educating us.
That is also the perfect segue. You're a great room. That happens to also be the perfect segue to my conclusion, and then I'll make sure I open it up for questions or just any kind of conversation, whatever's on your mind. But I will jump
And I haven't even read your book.
to the end of my book because it's at the Wendy's headquarters. You guys are amazing. Okay. I went to a protest at the Wendy's headquarters so that the shareholders, at the shareholders meeting last summer, so that they would understand and have the chance to ask us questions and hear what our concerns were in the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, as an OSU professor concerned about the prospects of the Fair Food Program, about wanting students when they eat on campus to be contributing to the solution and not the problem, because every time we buy our food, we really are voting for the world that we want to see. Every time we eat, we can eat slavery, or we can eat dignity, and that actually goes into our bodies. I do believe in the continuity of we are what we eat, no? So at this, I'm talking about the conclusion of the shareholders meeting, and we're walking outside. And it happened that Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, was in attendance. And he talked to the Wendy's shareholders about wage and income at fast food restaurants, and talking about what, that he considered the wages to be exploitative. reading from my book. A heartening moment took place after the meeting outside of the corporate headquarters as Reverend Jackson and his retinue joined hands with the Immokalee workers and Fair Food Program advocates in a prayer. Jackson's devotional words resonate strongly with the impetus and energies that brought me to write this book, so I include them here. Quote, "Give us the strength to fight the fight. It's the right fight. Touch our hearts and make us better, never bitter. And we will not give up. We will not surrender." Jackson's Rainbow Coalition cohort and members of the CIW parted affectionately after the prayer, and CIW organizers continued on to the lunch being held at the MTSO seminary, where the Immokalee group was being hosted. There, Reyes, I refer to Gerardo Reyes, one of the leading organizers of the CIW, there, Reyes proudly reported about the surprise encounter with Reverend Jackson. "Me dio el secret handshake. He gave me the secret handshake," he was saying about Jackson. But his tone became serious again when he confirmed to the assembled visitors that there were no small actions in the movement for farm workers' rights. And its success does not depend on the decisions made by Wendy's executives, but on us. Describing the individual and collective efforts to advance protections through the auspices of the Fair Food Program. "Every action is a drop of water," Reyes said. "The rock thinks that it's unbreakable, but that drop of water is going to keep striking until it breaks through to the core." At the shareholders' meeting, it was never more apparent to me that workers and consumers have the power to reshape our foodways when knowledge and compassion are joined to persistent action. Graced to be in the presence of so many courageous fighters on the front line of the fight for food justice, Reyes' words invigorated my conviction that while we can't do all things right each and every day, no day goes by that we can't do one thing. Knuckles up. Get it? See? So I'm going to stop there and open it up to questions, conversation. I'd like to ask you, what can we do? What can we do? I know not everybody is going to, I would urge you to, but I'm aware that not everybody is going to leave here and buy a Mexican wrestling mask and start jumping into some street performance, although it would be a better city if you did. But what can we do?
Can you talk about some of the, I guess, some of the victories that your work has? Is there anything you're proud of that you've? Have you seen any change in like Midwest restaurants? Something that
I have recommended restaurants. I haven't seen like real changes in Midwest restaurants, but I'm not going back and doing the tour over and over again to see, I'm not measuring for that. I'll tell you about some success stories that I'm very excited about. One of my chapters is called Homegirl Industries, Homegirl Cafe, part of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. It's a gang, redirection program, like a rehabilitation, but the idea is that it's restoring and transforming the lives of people who have been in the prison system or been in the penitentiary system, been in corrections at some point. So they come out and it trains them to work in restaurants. The cafe itself, all the produce comes from local farms that are organic, that they're also learning to grow. So that dignity through food, through the land, through agriculture, back to the races, there's no small things. I would say that's a brilliant success story because it's taking the most vulnerable among us and turning them into heroic providers, right? Really subverting the identity of homies and cholos and showing them how capable they are of doing something sustainable and doing something that is nourishing for their communities. And so that transforms everybody from inside and out, and that's one of those spaces that I like to go. There's a cosecha restaurant that is in Oakland, California, where it's very much my farm worker to table notion was inspired, because they commit to every aspect of the food chain being one that is true to what we want to put into our bodies, but also spiritually, right? From the land, from organic farms, to the labor in the restaurants, to the food that they provide, hanging on to and preserving Mexican heritage foodways, which is another thing that is in jeopardy. And that's a whole other conversation in terms of trade wars and the kinds of corn dumping that are happening in Mexico. So in terms of little victories, I think when I talk about, for example, fair trade, we have that conversation, and I know that my students are going to go away and they're going to buy fair trade products. They're going to buy fair trade coffee. Coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world after crude oil. Imagine if we all decided it needed to all be fair trade. And when you buy fair trade, they have many more life chances. Their kids can go to school, they can wear shoes, the families are guaranteed a year-round wage, rather than just market fluctuations and selling their product at a loss at times. So these are little things that I think we can do, you know? Carry a shopping bag. There's not a day that goes by that we can't, you know, win a victory, right? And in terms of the corporate stuff, I think that talking to consumers is going to be the way that we can shake up a little bit how we make some of those choices. Yeah.
What objections do the Krogers and Wendy's give to getting on the bandwagon? I mean,
Yeah. They tend to say that they are comfortable with their system, their regulatory organizations, right? So they do have regulatory measures, and they say, we're comfortable with those, we don't need the Fair Food Program's regulatory measures. Wendy's stopped picking tomatoes in Florida and moved their tomato picking operations to Mexico because the CIW was putting so much pressure on them. They're like, forget it, we'll just leave the country. And in Mexico, there was even less regulation of the treatment of workers. So we cried foul on that. Obviously, the CIW was going to cry foul on that. Now they're coming back and saying, well, we're in greenhouses, but they continue insisting that they already have a sufficient regulatory apparatus in place. And it's one that has had different, we've seen a lot of, just a lot of neglect of workers' rights, a lot of abuses within the regulatory system that they have going on in place right now. So we keep coming back to them and saying, actually, that is not enough protection of workers, and the wages are not sufficient. So they have a lot, you know, there's a lot. And I heard an interview with President Drake, the Ohio State University's president, and it seems like he takes it very seriously, but he's also siding with the Wendy's corporate headquarters and saying, okay, well, if you say that's enough regulation, I'll go with that. And he says he takes it very seriously, but I don't think that's good enough. And you know, it's personally sad to me, as an OSU professor, that Michigan has ended their contract with Wendy's, but we haven't. Yeah, so, you know, that's a victory, but, you know, I mean, you know, just from our own rivalry, right? I mean, shouldn't we be leading the charge on, you know, fair food?
And let's call on the spirit of Dave Thomas.
Okay, all right, you have a lot of faith in the spirit. What else? Those are really good questions.
I was thinking of a cost I read that if this border crisis continues, avocados are going to increase in cost by 20%. And if we took a poll around how many people love avocados and use it as part of their meal, it's a pretty popular item. 20% is a a lot. Uh-huh.
Nobody's, beating down the door to pay more for their groceries, right? I mean, that is not something that's not the stuff that dreams are made of. So we have to take a good look at how we maintain low prices, and then take care of the people who are putting that food on our table. Because we can't have this imaginary world in which we have work without the workers. That's actually not a reality. That's not a thing, right? And it seems like the next best thing is having work with unpaid workers, which is what leads to the modern day slavery circumstances, that we see in the agricultural sector. Yeah?
Okay, Wall Street, I call them the biggest cause of most of the problem in this country and around the world of greed. What do you think about that?
I think that we have to have a lot more government regulation in place, because I do think that there are limits on what we can expect to happen just based on personal responsibility. Make good food choices. Well, what's at the market next to me, right? So I do think that there needs to be just system-wide government and corporate responsibility, so that they're not pumping us with not just racist, but also poisonous food products.
Yeah, Wall Street kind of runs themselves,
Yeah.
It's greed, and basically, if they can get another dollar for cutting this business out, or moving it this, or doing tomatoes cheaper somewhere else, they have totally blind eyes. They don't care.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the calls is at the level of Wall Street.
I think that we have more power than we suspect as consumers, as thinkers, as people in a conversation. If magically Nikes, because they have a swoosh logo, can charge 10 times more than a generic sneaker because there's an image on it. That's consumer-driven mythology. That is fundamentally more valuable because that's a swoosh logo. As consumers, are we capable of changing our imagination a little bit so that workers' rights are as valued? A fair trade logo is as valued as a swoosh logo. Can that be on trend at some point? I think that we do have responsibility as consumers, and I think they feel it, because if they just care about the bottom line, it really is us powering that bottom line. Now, I think that there's many abuses going on at the top, but I also think that we have a lot more power than we imagine, and I would not be able to teach college if I wasn't convinced that my students can make a difference in their world. So I do totally respect your point, and my only pushback is, well, what can we do about that? I don't want to, I'm not capable of imagining that we can do nothing about it, do you know? And fair trade came about in the 80s as a response to the Central American crisis, where people were saying trade, not aid. And thanks to college campuses, college students, and ministries, local parishes, they started bringing fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate, and fair trade crafts, right? How much power does the cultural center have in having a corner where fair trade crafts and bags of coffee are sold, right? That was consumer driven, that was consciousness, that was awareness matched to discipline, right? Persistent action. We start with awareness.